really pleased to welcome John Inverdale to Killik Rugby this morning. So you're heavily involved at Esher, I understand. What is your role there, and how is the club doing?
I've been Chairman of Rugby there for too long now. I joined the club 30 years ago, nearly 29 years ago. I was fixture sec for many years. That was an interesting job. I mean, that's another interesting thing about how the game has changed, actually. When I was fixture secretary, we were running 8-9 sides every weekend, and I was on a Friday night scrambling around to get fixtures for the fourth team because their opponents had cancelled. Nowadays, we put out 5 and 6, but a lot of clubs have gone from 5 to 2, some from 4 to 1. Playing numbers are, really suffering at the moment. That's an absolutely huge issue for the game to address. And maybe the Rugby World Cup, it's not going to be a panacea to all ills, but it can perhaps be the catalyst for a regeneration of numbers. So I did that for a few years, and then I kept playing the whole time. But we had a tragic incident where one of our players died on the field of play, and I was playing alongside him. I was 10 yards away, and we'd always felt we were a slightly underachieving club, and that acted as the catalyst for us to get Simon Halliday, former England winger who played in the World Cup final in '91, in as coach, and to try and galvanise the club, really. And at the first team level, that's precisely what happened, and we won several promotions. And in recent times we've had a few seasons in the Championship, so we're playing in National 1 at the moment. So that was actually, tragically, what lit the fire of the club, really. And often actually you need something like that to actually galvanise people to actually do something, and it sort of united the club, and it took us on to the next stage.
For Esher now, I know they have been up in the Championship. I mean, it's a big step up from sort of amateur, semi-professional to a professional league. Is that part of the problem for the game now, that step up is becoming too big?
The economics of the game at that level intrinsically aren't work. They just don't work. Whether it's because the players are being paid too much, but the bottom line of it as well, just look at the gates. Look at the gates of some of the clubs in the Championship, and you think, how on earth does that work as an economic model? Because it just palpably doesn't. It's the equivalent of being level 6 perhaps in football, and maybe even below that. Most clubs in the Championship rugby, the second tier rugby, would give anything to have the gates that they have in the Vanarama Conference football, which is tier 5. They give anything for that. Okay. If you take Bristol out of the equation, and Worcester as well. So I think it's a big issue that the game has to address about what is the point of the second tier, and if it is to create, if we're going to have, Premiership 1 and Premiership 2, 14 teams in each, 28 teams, how are we going to make teams 15 to 28 viable, and also how are we going to make their grounds representative of a sport that is the second most important winter sport, and yet for some of the facilities are simply just not good enough at some of the grounds. I mean, it really, just in the modern era, just palpably not good enough.
Talking about, the buzz about rugby and everything exciting about rugby, World Cup this year, I mean, it was a great Six Nations, and now we're heading off into World Cup. You're hosting ITV's coverage. How's that going to be different from what you do on the BBC, or is it going to be the same?
We're going to have adverts. I think it will be, essentially it's a rugby match, and there's only so much you can do. You can talk about it, you can interview some of the players, you can do one or two nice little bits and bobs, you can show lots of colourful pictures, and then you've got to show the game. And I'm a huge believer that actually everything around the event, whatever the event is, it's a rugby match, it's a football match, it's a tennis match, whatever it is, people are fundamentally tuning in to see the game. And what we do around it is, they're not peripherals, because they're integral to the whole thing, but nobody's tuning in. Nobody has ever, I don't think, ever switched on a rugby programme at 2 o'clock for a 2:30 kickoff and switched off at 29 minutes past 2 and gone, that's it, I've seen the bit I switched on to see. People switch on at 29 minutes past 2 for the 2:30 kickoff. So I think you should never actually overestimate how important the bits around it is. But that is what gives it credibility. That is what gives it a bit of a bit of colour, but also I think it's an opportunity to explain the game, because you had to look at that England-France game on the last day of the Six Nations. 10 million people watching. It'd be very interesting to know how many of those 10 million people had never played a game of rugby in their life. I'd say, I have absolutely no idea, but I'm guessing 8.5.
Oh, possibly.
Yeah. 80, between 80 and 80% of people who are watching that game had never played the game in their lives. So part of our job, not just the commentary team, but part of our job, in the studio or by the pitch or whatever it might be, is to explain to people who are saying, this is an amazing spectacle, it's a fantastic game, these are incredible athletes, but I don't really understand what's going on. So it is our job, without, doing it as though you're trying to explain, to primary school kids. But you have to explain in a way that people can say, oh, it's more rewarding. I get more out of watching the game now by having heard what those guys are saying, because they've actually explained the nuances of the game to me, because it is complicated. The greatest thing about the game, at the same time as its biggest weakness, is its complexity.
Can you create a boom in rugby? Bring some excitement to it all, get more people involved as a consequence of your coverage, or is that not what this is about?
I think this is a golden opportunity for rugby in this country. But it's not just, it's a two-way street. TV can direct people to go somewhere, but actually the beneficiary, which is the clubs in these cases, they've got to do something too.
I agree.
They need to be much, much more proactive.
Yeah.
Because going back to what we were saying earlier, if playing numbers are on the decline, which they undeniably are, I can tell you last weekend, which was the last weekend of the season for clubs at my club's level.
Sure.
We had two sides cry off against our teams on the Friday night at 8 o'clock. So we suddenly had 35 players who'd been looking forward to a game on the last day of the season. Suddenly got 35 players who've got a Saturday free. That is happening more and more and more. And what happens then, if players are getting up for a game, looking forward to it, and the game gets cancelled, the more that happens, sometimes then players say, I'm not available next week. And then when they're not available one week, they're not available for a second week. And then suddenly, Pete, do you want a game next week? Oh, sorry, I'm away. And suddenly players start drifting off out of the game. So, this is the time for the rugby community at large to have a clear idea of what it's going to do over the course of this period. Television has a role to play by broadcasting the game, but the clubs, it is their responsibility, if they want to maximise what the Rugby World Cup can be for them, it's up to the clubs to say, what are we going to do over the course of that 6-week period and before, in the run-up to it, to make sure that as many people as possible within our local area and local community are aware of our existence, what services we provide from 7 to 70, and get them involved in our club and come and have a go. And then we can see if there's going to be a legacy, if there's going to be a real legacy, or whether it's just talk.
There's going to be some crazy games going on in the autumn. So England have got not a very nice group to play in and get out of. Which game are you looking forward to most in that group in particular?
The single game I'm looking forward to most is England-Wales. I've just got so many friends on both sides of the divide. I've watched England-Wales matches for 40-odd, 50 years. I just think it could be an atmosphere like no other, and I genuinely think it's a very, very hard match to call. I really do. I think what may have gone before may be a determining factor, but I just think I hate the word pressure, but I think that the inevitable pressure in the build-up to that is going to make it just a titanic duel, and be a real one of those games that you actually just want to say, I want to sit back, I want to really enjoy this, and more than anything, I just love it to be a fantastic game of rugby, because the audience it's going to get is going to be huge in television terms, and if that could be a game of immense quality, then actually that to me is the single most important thing, because then everybody, when they switch their TV off, is going to go, boy, wasn't that great? And that's what you want. That's what you want more than anything.